Yeah. I messed up. Oh well. Good morning. We are in John chapter 11. Familiar territory, the raising of Lazarus. And we're looking at it in the context of Jesus' overall earthly ministry. Glad you are here. We're in for a treat today. We have Daryl Emel with us, his wife Linda also. And Daryl will be preaching for us later. And this evening, we're going to have a song service. And looking forward to that very much. Daniel chapter 11. And because of Daryl, our Daniel class is being postponed. So don't be mad at me. So we won't have our Daniel class for a while. We'll have to wait on the handwriting on the wall. Antia, thank you for that soup. It was very good. All right. I'm going to remind you of the events of John 11. This involves Lazarus and his sisters, Mary and Martha. Mary, Martha, and Lazarus. These are good friends of Jesus. Isn't that fascinating that he had people who were his friends, who were not his apostles or connected to his apostles? And we see them especially here in the Gospel of John. Where did they live? What was the little village that they lived in? Bethany, that's right, which is very close to Jerusalem. Jesus is in Perea. And we'll look at a map here in a moment. But Jesus is in Perea, which is east of Judea. And he's there in part because he's fleeing from the religious leaders in Judea who want to do what to Jesus? They want to hurt him. They want to stone him. They want to kill him. And so he is staying away from that. When Jesus receives the news that Lazarus, whom you love, is sick, he whom you love is sick, he immediately leaves Perea and goes to Bethany. No, he delays 2 days. We'll talk about that a little bit. And in the bulk of the material, verses 17 through 44, Jesus is with his disciples in Bethany, and he interacts with Mary and Martha. There's a lot of detail there. We'll try to squeeze all that into our session this morning. This is one of the most magnificent passages in all of Scripture. And if you look at numbers 1, 2, and 3 on the map there, You can see Bethany, where Mary and Martha are. They send word, number 2, to Jesus in Perea. Jesus waits 2 days, and then he travels back to Bethany. And we'll look at numbers 4 and 5 here in just a moment next. So basically, Bethany, Perea, Bethany. Then, as the chapter continues, you see that people who are witnesses to the raising of Lazarus, who go and report to the Sanhedrin in Jerusalem. And then Jesus secretly travels on to what's called Ephraim. Don't hear that name too often, but he goes up to Ephraim. You remember that we've been looking at John, Luke, John, and we'll go back to Luke as he is in the midst of his central section, Luke's central section. A lot of teaching by Jesus as he is setting his face to go to Jerusalem. But today we're just going to be in John 11. John 11. So here's number 4, where folks go report to the Sanhedrin. And it gets to the point they are so concerned about Jesus' popularity, and it's so near the Passover when they're going to have thousands of Jews descend on Jerusalem. What do they plot or consider doing to Lazarus, who was just raised from the dead? Do you remember? They plot to murder him so that people can't say, there's Lazarus who was dead. Now, maybe Lazarus was just sick and really, really bad off. Okay. Why did Jesus wait 2 extra days? What's one possible reason he did that? So that everybody would know beyond a shadow of a doubt that Lazarus was indeed dead. But Jesus raised him from the dead. What does this anticipate? What great miracle does the raising of Lazarus anticipate in the Gospel of John? His own resurrection. That's right. There are 7 signs in the Gospel of John. In our study of all 4 Gospels together, we haven't looked at unique details of each Gospel very much. But while we're here in John 11, I just want to emphasize that in the Gospel of John, a unique feature of John is 7 signs. That's what John calls them. We would call them miracles, 7 miracles, but he calls them signs. And he numbers the first 2. In John 2, verse 11, this is the first sign that Jesus performed in Cana of Galilee. In John 4:54, this is the second sign. He doesn't continue to number them, but we're able to see what they are. And this is the last of the 7, the raising of Lazarus. Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am, absolutely. You remember the thesis of the Gospel of John, John 20, 30, and 31. These things have been written that you might believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and that believing you might have life through his name. And then 1 John continues that, builds on that. So these 7 signs, the ultimate sign, the 7th sign is the raising of somebody who was dead all over. I mean, he was dead. There was no way he could be raised from the dead. What scholars have analyzed the Gospel of John, and I'm just pointing this out, the first 12 chapters, basically the book of signs. You got a prologue at the beginning, the book of signs, and that walks us through these 7 signs, as John calls them. And all throughout, Jesus is talking about being glorified, glorifying his Father glorifying him. And the ultimate glorification of Jesus is when he is lifted up. How is he going to be lifted up and be glorified? His cross, and of course, subsequently, his resurrection and his ascension. So that's a basic structure of the Gospel of John. And you can see Jesus there talking about glory in John 11, verse 4, and John 11, verse 40. So we'll look at those when we get to them. And we could keep going, and we won't. But in John 12, Jesus continues, this is the commentary, John writing about this. Isaiah said these things because he saw his glory and spoke of him. Glory, 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 all throughout the Gospel of John. In addition to the 7 signs, as you well know, there are 7 sayings, and they're not exclusively in the first 12 chapters. They actually cross over. But the 5th one is, I am the resurrection and the life. So he said, I am the bread of life. I am the light of the world. He said that twice in John 8 and John 9. I am the door of the sheep. I am the good shepherd, all in John 10. When we have looked at this and we've made a big deal out of it, when Jesus says, I am, what is he channeling there? What is he referring to? God in Exodus 3:14 saying, I am who I am. I am the eternal one. Is Jesus claiming to be God when he makes these 7 magnificent statements? I mean, who in the world is the resurrection and the life? Some mere mortal who has power over life and death? I don't think so. I am the way, the truth, and the life. No man comes to the Father but through me. That's some pretty lofty language right there. Jesus is claiming to be God, and we believe that he is God. That's just a quick little overview. Let's take a look. We are not going to be able to read every verse here, but we're not going to, at least I should say. But you can see at the beginning of John 11, Jesus is off in Perea, and there's a certain man who was ill, Lazarus of Bethany, the village of Mary and her sister Martha. And let's look at verse 3. The sisters sent to him saying, Lord, he whom you love is sick. Jesus had a special relationship with Mary, Martha, and Lazarus. Anytime he was in Jerusalem, he was going to be in the Garden of Gethsemane, but he was also going to be in the home of Lazarus, Mary, and Martha. It's just truly amazing that Jesus had such a close connection with these folks. And Jesus responds, we mentioned this a moment ago, by saying this in verse 4. This illness does not lead to death. It is for the glory of God, so that the Son of God may be glorified through it. What do you think Jesus means by that? How is Jesus, the Son of Man, how is he going to be glorified by Lazarus' sickness? When he raises him from the dead. Absolutely. All right. You see the fear of the disciples. When Jesus says, let's go to Judea, they say, Rabbi, the Jews were just now seeking to stone you. Are you going there again? That's back in John 10, when Jesus said, I and the Father are one. They took offense at that. They're scared for Jesus. You should be doing this. I don't think you should go back. And Jesus says in verse 11, our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep, but I go to awaken him. Another unique feature of John's gospel is confusion over statements that Jesus makes. And this is another example where Jesus says he's asleep. What does he mean by that? He's dead, but the disciples go, huh? Well, if he's asleep, what's the big deal? Let's just go wake him up. And of course, he has to tell them plainly that he is dead. All right, verse 17. When Jesus came, he found that Lazarus had already been in the tomb 4 days. Bethany was near Jerusalem, about 2 miles off, the ESV says. And many of the Jews had come to Martha and Mary to console them concerning their brother. I'm going to tell you what I think. I think Mary, Martha, and Lazarus are well-to-do. And part of that is what's stated in verse 2, and I skipped over it. This is the Mary who anointed the Lord with ointment. This is precious ointment. It would be worth a year's salary. And here she is just taking this ointment and spending it on Jesus. And he praises her for that. We will be looking at that event, just not right now. But John mentions it in his gospel, and it hasn't happened yet. We'll be getting to it later. Normally, they'll mention an event and say, you remember when this happened in the past, but it hasn't happened yet. It's in the future. Look at verse 21. Martha meets up with Jesus, just the two of them. And this is what she says, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. What did Mary and Martha expect Jesus to do when they sent word to him? Okay. Yeah. Jesus had healed lots and lots of folks. Has he raised people from the dead? He has. But people who've been dead 4 days? There's and it's not stated here in John 11, but there's a superstition that people had. Your spirit lingered for 3 days. And if within 3 days it was possible by God's miracle that your spirit could go back into your body and you'd live. We think, well, that's nuts. I mean, you're dead, you're dead. But 4 days, nope, it's too late. And I think that's part of what's going on here. Lazarus is dead like Rover, dead all over. No way at this point. And she says in verse 21, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. Drop over to verse 32. So Martha goes back to their house and says, Mary, go see Jesus. This is a little later, verse 32. And what does Mary say to Jesus? When it's just him and her. Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. When I read verbatim the same response, it makes me think maybe Mary and Martha have been talking. And what do you think they've been saying to each other? I can't believe he didn't come back. I can't believe this. Jesus is our friend, and he didn't come back. And I do believe, I agree with you, that they were expecting Jesus to heal Lazarus. But that's not what he did. Yes, sir. I've been waiting for you to make a comment. You're the visiting preacher, yet you're allowed to, okay? That's right. Right. Yeah. So every situation is different. And could Jesus have healed Lazarus from Perea? Absolutely. In part, he's responding to their faith. In another way, he is doing this as an intentional sign. Well, let's go back to Martha and her conversation. Verse 21, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. Okay. And I'm going to break this down. Conversation with Martha. And it's so significant. Verse 22, but even now, I know that whatever you ask from God, God will give you. Is she thinking, all right, maybe he can raise Lazarus from the dead? I don't think so because of the continuing conversation. Jesus says to her, your brother will rise again. Martha said to him, I know that he will rise again in the resurrection on the last day. And then Jesus says, I am the resurrection and the life. Whoever believes in me, though he die, yet shall he live. And everyone who lives and believes in me shall never die. Do you believe this? The Gospel of John is often referred to as the gospel of belief because that verb or noun, belief, faith, or to believe, is used 100 times in the Gospel of John. Do you believe this? And she said, yes, Lord, I believe that you are the Christ, the Son of God, who is coming into the world. But she makes a lofty confession about Jesus. Does she still not think that Jesus is going to raise him from the dead? Or is she getting excited and saying, oh boy, he's going to raise him from the dead? I don't see that here. But this is so significant. What does it mean? What does Jesus mean when he says, I am the resurrection and the life? What does he mean by that? Okay? Jesus is described as the first fruits of the resurrection. What does that mean? That's not here but in Paul's letters. To be the first fruits is not a concept I'm used to. I'm not a farmer or the son of a farmer, but the first fruits is that first crop. And what would the Israelites do when they harvested their grain? Well, the first thing they would do is take the best of their harvest and offer it as a sacrifice to God. You think they take it down to the county fair and get judged on their grain, but no. What they're going to do is offer it to God as a sacrifice, giving him the best. At least that's what they were supposed to do. Jesus is the first fruits of the resurrection. He is the best of the best. The Son of God himself died and was raised from the dead. But what was unique about Jesus' resurrection? You know, Lazarus is going to die again. He's raised from the dead, but he's going to die at some point. But what about Jesus? Did he die again? No. He was raised from the dead, never to die again. And he's blazed that trail for us. Do you believe this, brothers and sisters? Do you believe that one day you're going to die and then be raised never to die again? That's what Jesus is getting at. He's the one who makes that happen. He is the giver of resurrection. He is the provider of new life in a very literal way. Our spirit never dies. Our body may die. It will die unless Jesus comes before then. I know that he will rise again in the resurrection. Jesus says, let me tell you, I am the resurrection. I am the life. After that amazing conversation and her wonderful confession, even though she doesn't fully understand, I don't think. Verse 28, she calls for Mary, and Mary, her sister, says the same thing to Jesus. Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. Verse 33, when Jesus saw her weeping, listen to this, the Jews who had come also weeping, he was deeply moved in his spirit and greatly troubled. Have you ever felt that way? Have you ever been deeply moved in spirit and greatly troubled? We've all experienced that. All right, wait a minute. Why isn't Jesus just smugly saying, hold on, Mary, okay, hold on. I'm going to raise Lazarus from the dead here in just a few minutes, okay? He knows he's going to raise Lazarus from the dead. Do you think that's true? That's why he delayed 2 days. Then why is Jesus crying? Oh, these are crocodile tears. He's just trying to explain this to me. He knows he's going to raise Lazarus from the dead. Okay. With a lot of emotion, Jesus then says in verse 34, where have you laid him? They said to him, Lord, come and see. Jesus wept. I know that's the shortest verse in our English Bibles, but it's probably one of the most profound. God in the flesh, weeping real human tears. So the Jews said, see how he loved him. And then listen to verse 37. Some of them said, could not he who opened the eyes of the blind also have kept this man from dying? Not raised him from the dead, but kept him from dying. What is that referring to? Who is the man who was blind that Jesus healed? What is that referring to in the Gospel of John? John chapter 9. We looked at that just a couple of weeks ago. And the man had to go wash his eyes in the pool of Siloam. He was interrogated by the religious leaders. He was eventually kicked out of the synagogue. And we looked at that just a couple of weeks ago. When you read the Gospel of John, we need to remember, yes, it's written so that we will see the events that happened before. But this is actually the second time that people talk about that blind man. It was also talked about at the end of John chapter 10, and we observe that. Chapters 9 and 10 go together. And then we see here again, this man is mentioned. So people are hearing about Jesus' miracle. They're hearing about a man being who was blind, no longer blind, And are people going to hear about this miracle? You bet. And the religious leaders are going to be very fearful. Jesus is caught up in emotion. And then in verse 38, Jesus raises Lazarus from the dead. I'm going to try to read this. Then Jesus, verse 38, deeply moved again, came to the tomb. It was a cave, and a stone lay against it. Jesus said, take away the stone. Martha, the sister of the dead man, ever pragmatic, she says to him, Lord, by this time he stinketh. I love how the King James says that. There will be an odor. He's been dead 4 days. That detail is being given to us in the narrative to emphasize this guy's dead. There's no chance of him being raised from the dead. Jesus said to her, did I not tell you that if you believed, you would see the glory of God? So they took away the stone. And Jesus lifted his eyes and said, he's praying, Father, I thank you that you have heard me. I knew that you always hear me. But I said this on account of the people standing around, that they may believe that you sent me. So everybody's hearing this. When he had said these things, he cried out with a loud voice, Lazarus, come forth! The man who had died came out, his hands and feet bound with linen strips, and his face wrapped with a cloth. That's the custom of burial. They're wrapping up the body so that the bones the flesh will deteriorate, and then they'll have the bones and put them in a sarcophagus and, bone box. But Jesus said, no, we're not going to do that. Jesus said, unbind him and let him go. So they had to unravel the head piece. They had to unravel the body piece. By the way, there's somebody else in the Gospel of John who's also going to be wrapped up with a headpiece and wrapped up with linens on his body. Jesus. How did he get out of them? He took them off, or he slipped out of them. Tuck that away. It's really interesting. We're going to be honing in on the post-resurrection appearances of Jesus for our next quarter in March, April, May. And I'm so excited to go through that slowly and carefully with you. And there's a lot of details that sometimes we just glide over. In a study like this, I mean, you spend 12 months on the Gospels. 6 months, we did that a year ago, and then we said we're going to take a break. We're going to spend 6 months now, and it's already January, so we're 2 months into this 6-month study. And by the end of it, let's just get through this. Let's just hurry. But we're not going to do that. We're going to take our time and look at the post-resurrection appearances. And they are fascinating. They are just absolutely amazing. And one of the details, it seems, that John points out to us is Jesus slipped out of his clothes. Now here they have to unwrap them. And he comes out unbound. Look at verse 45. There's a lot of folks here who believe, don't they? Many of the Jews, therefore, who had come with Mary and had seen what he had done, believed in him. Some of them went to the Pharisees and told them what Jesus had done. And then so the scene changes now. We're leaving Bethany, and then we're being taken to the inner council behind the scenes of the Sanhedrin. And these are the people who are going to convict Jesus very soon. What are we to do? This man performs many signs. We can't deny them. If we let him go on like this, everyone will believe in him. And the Romans, listen to this, and the Romans will come and take away both our place and our nation. What should have been the response of the religious leaders? He raised Lazarus from the dead. What should have been their response to that? He must be the Messiah. He must be. But what is their response? He is threatening our hold on power. The Romans are going to come, and there's going to be a tumult, and People are going to love Jesus, and we got to do something about this. And then it's Caiaphas, evil Caiaphas, the high priest. I mean, later, Caiaphas, the evil high priest, is going to be one-on-one with Jesus, the perfect high priest. And Caiaphas is going to condemn Jesus to death. And here's Caiaphas in verse 49, who was high priest that year, said to them, "You know nothing at all, nor do you understand that it is better for you that one man should die for the people, not that the whole nation should perish." And then we have this comment. He did not say this on his own accord, but being high priest that year, he prophesied. He didn't realize what he was saying, but he was saying the truth. He prophesied that Jesus would die for the nation, and not for the nation also, but also to gather into one the children of God who were scattered abroad. So from that day on, they made plans to put him to death. We're going to stop there, but you can read the last few verses. I want to make some application as we go through this. And I'm going to bring up some points, and I would love to get some of your feedback. But Mary and Martha, one application I think we can make is that change is inevitable. As we go through life, we want everything to be the same. We want everything to be the same. But things change. And in the case of Mary and Martha, they lost their brother. They got him back, which is great. But they were not happy that he had died. Have you experienced that? Changes in your life, and you're not happy about it? I think we all do. Helplessness happens to us all. Situation that we are facing, we're overwhelmed, and we realize, I can't control this. What are some examples? When someone dies, of course. What can happen to us that makes us feel helpless? So why'd you move? Okay. It's scary. It's scary. I heard somebody, sickness, when we get sick. You remember Asaph in Psalm 73, who was a godly man, but he was upset with God. He didn't understand. He was confused. Why? Because his health was broken and his perspective then changed. Yes, sir. Yeah. Back in the days of the draft. Hopefully that won't come back. We all have those moments of feeling helpless. And Mary and Martha definitely felt that way. And I think we can sympathize with them. We need our friends. We need our family. And they had a lot of people who came and supported them. I think that's important. When somebody dies in the family, we need to send them texts. We need to send them cards. We need to let them know that we care about them and be supportive of them. And this congregation needs to do a better job of that. No, not this congregation. We do a fabulous job of helping folks through difficult times. And some of you are experiencing death in the family right now. And having love and support means a lot. It really, really helps us through that situation. But I think it's interesting that Mary and Martha don't understand why Jesus delayed in coming. When somebody dies, when something tragic happens in your family, maybe it's financial ruin, something bad happens, and you're saying, well, why did God let this happen? And you may not be losing your faith per se, you're just lashing out. They don't understand. What's that song we sometimes sing? Farther along, we'll know all about it. Farther along, we'll understand why. Cheer up, my brother. Live in the sunshine. We'll understand this all by and by. I think I said all that right. Sometimes we just don't understand what's going on. And I guess that's part of being helpless, feeling helpless. All right, let's think about Lazarus. What application can we make from Lazarus and his situation? I mean, he's dead. He's sick and then he's dead. And yet, what does he do in his death? He honors Christ. He glorifies Christ. Verse 4, John 11, verse 4. This illness does not lead to death. It is for the glory of God. I think I should have had verse 4 up there instead of verse 3. So that the Son of God may be glorified through it. Yes, ma'am. Right. I think what Jesus is saying is we are going to like this life. This is for us who are faithful and believe, because how is eternal life? You remember the sheep and the goats, the parable of the sheep and the goats. These go into everlasting life, but these others go into eternal destruction. So life is good. Eternal life is great. Eternal destruction, not so good. Can we go back to that situation you were talking about, being drafted? Your whole life upended. When you make a move and you're lonely and uncertain about the future, can you still glorify God in that moment of uncertainty? What about Joseph, who was plucked from his home and enslaved in Egypt? How did it work out for him? It worked out great. Why? Because God was right there with him. And this saying I heard years ago, I love it. Bloom where you're planted. So you go to Amarillo, you're going to bloom. You go in the Navy, you're going to bloom. You're going to make the best of a bad situation. And praise God that He is with us every step of the way. Can He do that? Think about the situations that you're in right now, the difficulties that you're facing. Can you find the silver lining? Can you glorify God despite the situation you're facing right now? Lazarus. So let's look at verse 43. Glorify Christ in new life. And that's what we're ultimately aiming toward. Having new life in Christ. That's what the Old Testament prophets look toward. The new creation, the new exodus, where we are delivered from sin and are able to welcome a brand new kind of existence. All things are new. Behold, the old things have passed away. We are a new creation in God. When Paul talks in Romans 6, verses 3 and 4 about us being buried and then buried in the watery grave, we are raised to walk in newness of life. This is a new creation. The old man of sin is gone. A new person has risen in his place. That's the idea, that God makes all things new. And as you live your life as a Christian, we glorify God. At least that's what we're supposed to do. Adam and Eve, when they sinned, they turned their backs on being lights for God. And when we sin, we do the same thing. But when we become a Christian, from then on, we are the light of the world. We are showing the world what it looks like to be a Christian. If somebody were to take a look at your life, would they say, I don't want any part of that. I don't want any part of this Christianity business. I mean, look at this guy. He's miserable. He doesn't treat his wife right. She's not faithful. She has a bad temper. Newness of life means the old is gone. We put on the new man. I'm starting to preach. Sorry about that. All right, now what about Jesus? What application can we make from Jesus? I'll give you what I've got, and then you can tell me some of the things you're thinking about. Does Jesus care? when I've said goodbye to the dearest on earth to me? I guess I'm getting ahead of myself again there. Does Jesus hear us when we cry? Lazarus, your friend, or he whom you love is sick. Yeah, Jesus hears us when we cry. When the Israelites cried in Egypt, they cried, and God heard them. You ever cry out to God and think, he doesn't hear me? But you know he does. And he responds to his children. He hears our cries, and he's going to give us what we need. Do you believe that? I mean, we go through some tragic situations, and we feel alone, but we're not alone. We're not ever alone. I'm going through this quickly, and so I'm hushing y'all up. Y'all have some thoughts you want to share? Jesus hears our cry. Does that bring you comfort? Knowing, having confidence that he hears you. Yeah. All right. So what if tonight, as we finish up our song service, it'll be 5:45, 5:50, and somebody here looks out the window and goes, the sun is going down. It's getting dark out there. What are we going to do? What's your response to that? Probably your response is, you're nuts. But it is scary. It's getting dark. But it's not scary because we know this happens 365 days a year. The sun goes down, the sun comes up from our perspective. All right, what am I trying to get at? Are there times in your life when you have the sun go down on you and it's dark and it's scary, but then the sun comes back up? You make it through. You walk through the valley of the shadow of death. And it happens again, and it happens again. So what does that let you know? The next time you're in utter darkness and despair, you need to know it's going to be okay. I've been sick, folks, for about 3 weeks. Tony says 4. Now I've lost count. And I know my energy is going to come back. I know it is. Wish you would come a couple weeks ago. That sure would have been a big help. I'm feeling a lot better. I know. Because why? Well, because this has happened to me before. I get sick. I'm miserable. I lose all my energy. But it comes back. And I've heard a couple of people tell me, it says, well, whenever you start feeling better, don't just rush into things. I've learned that the hard way many times. And when you get older, did you all know this? When you get older, it's harder to get over things. I mean, it's amazing to me when you got this 3-year-old running around with 104 fever, just having the time of their life. Wait 50 years. Yes, sir. Whose fault was that? Wow. Absolutely. Hard when we're going through it. Are you a better person because of all those problems? Yeah. We're spoiled, rotten Americans, and we think we know what pain and sorrow is, but just look at the past, look at people who are dying for their faith. Does Jesus answer our prayers? Does God answer our prayers for us? Yes, every prayer, every single one. Is it always the way we think it should be answered? He is all-knowing, all-powerful. He knows the end from the beginning, and he knows what's best for us. He doesn't give us what we want all the time, and he will answer our prayers in his way. For the sake of time, I better bring this up. I started talking about this one already because it means a lot to me. Does Jesus care about you? You. He knew he was going to raise Lazarus from the dead, and yet when he saw Mary crying and everybody else crying, he started crying because he cares. When that plight fell on Reuben and his family, Jesus was grieved. He was heartbroken over that. And we need to know he cares about us, but he has the power to do something about it. I am the resurrection and the life, he said. And no matter what we go through in this life, ultimately, Jesus is able to say, Lazarus, come forth. There's this old-timey preacher, I've forgotten his name, and he's credited with saying this about John 11. The reason why Jesus said, Lazarus, come forth, is because if he had just said, come forth, then everybody would have come out of the tombs. That's power. Lazarus, come forth. This is one of our favorite passages for good reason. It gives us hope, it encourages us, and it reminds us that Jesus is the resurrection and the life, and we do not need to fear. All right, we're going to continue next week with Luke's central section, and then we're going to get into Jesus. 2 weeks from now, we're going to get into Jesus' triumphal entry into Jerusalem. I hate to give any spoilers away, but it's going to be really exciting the next few weeks. Somebody's going to die, and I don't want to tell you anything more than that. Thank you for going through this with me.